Hi everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're dissecting a truly monumental piece of practical cinema history. Before the era of totally computer-generated universes took over, Hollywood actually created on-screen magic using sheer physical audacity, massive budgets, and just unprecedented ambition. So let's take a look at a film that perfectly encapsulates that glorious era of action filmmaking. I want you to consider this question for just a second. What 1994 blockbuster cost a staggering $120 million, blew up an actual bridge, and then had its highly anticipated sequel totally canceled by real-world historical events? Well, the answer is James Cameron's absolute masterclass in action comedy, True Lies. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at a record-breaking action blockbuster. Second, the master of practical spectacle. Third, the one-take bridge explosion. Fourth, the canceled Legacy sequel. And finally, what happens when real life stops fiction. All right, Section 1, a record-breaking action blockbuster. So, picture this. It's the mid-1990s, and James Cameron is coming off the absolutely massive success of Terminator 2. He reunites with Arnold Schwarzenegger to really push the absolute limits of Hollywood. Just consider this staggering number right here. $120 million. True Lies was an incredible financial gamble by 20th Century Fox. To put that into perspective, it was one of the very first movies in history to ever break that $100 million production budget mark. But you know what? That massive gamble paid off remarkably well. The film grossed nearly $380 million worldwide. Audiences completely flocked to theaters for this white-knuckle ride. I mean, it dominated Japan's box office for 12 straight weeks and ended up becoming the third highest-grossing movie of 1994 globally. So, what was the actual story that drove those massive numbers? Well, the plot centers around the hilarious double life of Harry Tasker, played by Schwarzenegger. On one hand, he's a highly lethal covert agent for a U.S. counterterrorism agency. On the other hand, to his wife Helen, who is played just brilliantly by Jamie Lee Curtis, he's nothing more than a boring, perpetually traveling computer salesman. The film mines endless comedy from Harry trying to hide his lethal identity, all while simultaneously trying to stop a terrorist group from detonating nuclear warheads they've smuggled inside these priceless antique statues. It was essentially a distinctly American, highly comedic answer to the James Bond franchise. Moving right along to Section 2, Master of Practical Spectacle. What really set this film apart wasn't just the budget, it was how the action was captured. Before James Cameron left us for the virtual world of Avatar, he was renowned for these physically daunting productions. He relied heavily on practical effects. That means special effects produced physically in the real world, rather than relying on computer graphics. Cameron had this relentless drive for raw, physical action. If something needed to crash, fly, or explode, his very first instinct was to figure out how to just do it in real life. And this brilliantly illustrates that exact philosophy. The 7-mile bridge pursuit. Set down on the Florida Keys, this masterfully staged sequence involves Harrier jump jets, a convoy of stolen nuclear weapons, and a limousine careening toward the ocean. But the absolute climax of this scene? The stunning demolition of a massive chunk of the roadway itself to stop the terrorists from escaping. Which brings us to Section 3, the one-take bridge explosion. We kind of have to treat this famous stunt like a high-stakes heist because the crew quite literally only had a single attempt to capture this cinematic magic. Obviously, James Cameron couldn't just blow up a real, functioning stretch of an American highway. So, on the left, you can see the live-action stunt work. This was filmed on location at an actual out-of-service bridge in the Florida Keys. They dressed up an existing gap with fake debris so live vehicles could drive right up to the edge. But the actual explosion? On the right, you can see that required a massive, highly detailed miniature designed specifically for destruction. The visual effects team had a very specific, explosive plan here. Step 1, build a plaster miniature bridge. Except, actually, scratch that, calling it a miniature is almost a joke because it was 100 meters long and 3 meters tall. Step 2, they had to ship this colossal model all the way down to Florida for its close-up. And finally, Step 3, the explosion itself. They had to engineer a precise, slow explosion. You see, if they used too much pyrotechnics, the plaster model would simply vaporize into a puff of uncinematic dust. They needed the camera to capture flying chunks, bending guardrails, and debris splashing into the water below. Now, because of the painstaking detail that went into crafting this 100-meter model, the crew could only blow it up exactly once. There were no second chances. So to ensure they caught every possible angle of this one-take perfection, Cameron utilized exactly 7 camera shots to capture the blast. And even today, decades later, those few seconds of film look incredibly realistic. It still draws genuine awe from audiences. Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds. The canceled legacy sequel. With massive box office returns and groundbreaking visual effects, a follow-up seemed pretty much inevitable, right? The desire to return to these characters was absolutely there. Jamie Lee Curtis even stated, "I always hoped that Arnold and I would get to do True Lies again. That was obviously a movie that changed my life in a big way." Curtis, who successfully returned to legacy roles in franchises like Halloween, has long held out hope to reprise this iconic action comedy role alongside Schwarzenegger. So why didn't it happen? Let's look at the timeline. After the massive hit of the 1994 release, plans for a sequel were totally set in motion. However, in the late 90s, James Cameron got sidetracked, to put it mildly, by focusing entirely on making Titanic. After Titanic broke literally every record in the book, Cameron finally returned to the True Lies 2 script in the early 2000s. Both Schwarzenegger and Curtis officially signed on to reprise their roles. But then, on September 11, 2001, the terrorist attacks on the United States occurred. And following that devastating real-world event, the sequel project was officially and permanently canceled. That leads us into our final section, when real life stops fiction. Sometimes the tone of a piece of entertainment simply can no longer coexist with the reality of the world. James Cameron explained the cancellation with this really poignant statement. "We all felt that sense of devastation. It just wasn't funny anymore. I tried it, we worked on a script for a while. If you couldn't make it funny, it didn't seem worth it." The original film, at its core, was an action comedy about terrorists threatening to detonate nuclear weapons in American cities. In the post-9/11 global landscape, mining terrorism for comedic, action-packed entertainment felt entirely out of step with the times. The cultural context had just shifted irreversibly. So, the crucial point is this. While we never got to see Harry and Helen Tasker return for a second adventure, the original film remains a masterful, white-knuckle celebration of 90s cinema. It is a perfect time capsule of an era of ambitious studio filmmaking. It's a true testament to the days when filmmakers would literally build a 100-meter-long bridge out of plaster just to blow it up for a few seconds of glorious practical film magic. I want to leave you with this final thought as we wrap up today's explainer. Could a True Lies sequel even work in our modern era? You know, with today's heavy reliance on CGI over the practical stunts that defined the original, and with our constantly shifting, highly complex global politics, could a film successfully blend lighthearted comedy with the threat of international terrorism today? It really challenges us to think about how much cinematic techniques and our cultural landscape as a whole have irreversibly changed over the last 3 decades. Thanks so much for exploring this blockbuster with me today.